Well, I think we'll get started. Thank you all for coming this evening. We have a crowded house. It's wonderful to see you all joining our presentation tonight. My name is Pat Phillips, and I'm honored to serve as the president of the board of the Green Mountain Audubon Society, which covers Franklin, Grand Isle, and Chittenden counties. If you receive Audubon magazine based upon your zip code, you're probably and you live within one of those three counties, you're probably a member of the Green Mountain Audubon. We want to thank you for your membership and for the many donations that people have provided and their generosity. These funds have been used to support programs like the one we're going to have tonight, numerous bird outings, and in addition, they've had funded scholarships for students to attend summer camps at the Audubon Center in Huntington, have supported a variety of environmentally related projects in schools and communities, and have funded much needed renovation projects at the Audubon Center. If you're interested in joining, in the chat, I've pasted a link to our website and you can find more information there. We always feel that it's important to note that the Green Mountain Audubon Society recognizes that the region within which we operate has been sacred to indigenous peoples for thousands of years. The Western Abenaki are the traditional caretakers of these lands and waters, and we respect their connection to the region and remember their hardships the hardships they've endured and that continue to endure. And lastly, we give thanks for the opportunity to share this place and endeavor to work to protect it. A brief note regarding tonight's program: should you have any questions, please type them into the chat, and our Master of Ceremonies, Mistress of Ceremonies, will share those with our speaker at the end of the program. So now on to our program. And at this point, I want to introduce our MC for this evening, ornithologist Dr. Ingrid Barcelow, and she's going to introduce our speaker, and then we'll take your questions. And so, Ingrid, it's all over you.
Thank you, Pat. Good evening, everybody. So tonight, I have the honor to introduce Eric Hanson, who comes from the Vermont Center for Eco Studies tonight to talk to us. Eric is going to talk about the program that the Vermont Center for Eco Studies runs, where he's a biologist, and he's going to discuss the amazing recovery of the loons that have had in Vermont over the past 30 years. We're going to learn about the threats that they face, the conservation actions that have brought them back. He is also going to explore the fascinating behaviors they have and their natural history, from territorial takeovers to visual and verbal communication. The program that Eric runs, the Vermont Loon Conservation Project, is a program of the Vermont Center for Eco Studies and the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about Eric. So since 1998, Eric has been the biologist for the Vermont Loon Conservation Project. He has conducted research on the common loon since 1992. His early work focused on banding loons to answer basic biological questions and assess toxicology concerns. Eric then received his master's degree at the University of Minnesota, setting up a volunteer-based monitoring program for Minnesota's 12,000 loons. His loon work in Vermont has focused on management around loon nest sites, education of lake users, and making volunteers an integral part of loon conservation in Vermont, a program that has been very successful, in my opinion. We'll learn more about it. He has also taught various ecology courses at Sterling College and for the Rhodes Scholar Program. In the winter months, Eric takes care of the cross-country ski trails at the Craftsbury Outdoor Center. I think that he really likes cross-country skiing. It's one of his passions. And just a couple things about his background education. He got his bachelor's degree in biology, environmental sciences from Colby College in Waterville, Maine, and his master's degree in conservation biology from the University of Minnesota. So with that, I want to welcome Eric to tonight's presentation and looking forward to learning more about loons. Thanks, Eric.
Okay, I think I'm on. All right, welcome everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces in the audience, so to speak. I'm just going to do a quick shout out to Bill and Sue Minard down on, well, they live up in Burlington, but on Lake Maury. Cindy Grimes, Eleanor Osborne, Lee Cordner, who helped with a potential injured bird and gave us some great photographs. Ann Craven is up there. She's actually up from my way up in the Glover area. Chip Wright on Lake Iroquois. That's probably one of the closest breeding sites to this region. That it's been super successful over the past, oh boy, I can't, 8 years now, 7 years, something like that. The Weasons, actually, they're Hardwick folks, so Audubon reaches out quite far. So I'm gonna jump right into the program. This is, I mean, it's really a volunteer-based program, and I'm a coordinator of all these folks who chime in and let me know what's going on around the state. We're lucky enough to monitor pretty much what we think almost every pair in the state. And it's just like we just have one of the best data sets over the last 45 years of a Vermont population. And I'm really excited. Right now, I'm working with some new staff at Vermont Center for Eco Studies who are really helping us to figure out a I can't even say the word. We're going to have an online platform, but at the same place, we're creating this going to be an amazing database that we're going to be really able to analyze, what's gone on with our amazing growth in this population, how's it going to go in the future. And so we're just excited about all the things that we're going to be doing. There's going to be lots of data that's going to be more available to people and groups, just to analyze what's on your lake or your favorite lake, or where do you want to go visit and paddle for a reason. You'll be able to go to this site and say, hey, this lake needs some surveys. Especially those folks in the Chittenden County area. We don't have a lot of lakes over there. So when you go, it's usually a commitment to get up to the Groton area or get up to the Northeast Kingdom or go down central Vermont. And this data system is going to allow us to really make it easy for you to figure out where do we need some more surveys. And it's a great excuse to go visit lots of new lakes you've never been to before, whether it's a boat or a paddle or just a hike along the shoreline. All right, I think we'll jump into the program. Yeah, put your questions in the chat. Ingrid will consolidate some of them at the end, and we'll go from there. This will take a second. Okay, I think we're good. Ingrid, are we all set? Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can see that. It's perfect.
Okay, so VCE. When we started in sort of 2007, we branched off from Vermont Institute of Natural Science. We had 7 people on staff back in that year. We're now close to 20, if not even a little bit more. We've been super successful in expanding our projects and our programming. We have a large history in bird conservation and bird monitoring. And now in the last decade, picking up a lot of insect and plant work. It's the area that we've done, there's the least amount of data. So I'm sure many of you have heard about the bee and bumblebee projects, and 3 bumblebees that are now hopefully going to be listed, and try to figure out some conservation concerns or figure out conservation answers to them. Just so many great things in that Vermont Atlas of Life pool. And I encourage you to go to our website to take a look at more of that. Loons have been going on since 1978. That's when this program started. And we found there weren't many out there. But loons are just a charismatic species. You can really watch pretty much everything about them every daylight hour and not interfere with their life. And you're not too many other animals you can do that except for your cat and dog. And I just throw this title out there because there's so many fascinating aspects of their life. And we're going to go over a lot of these sibling rivalries where 2 chicks might go at it. I do touch on Mercury, so we'll get there. And I will touch on satellite tracking and migration. But there's something really special, especially to me in late April, early May, your first paddle, your first visit to a water body, and you hear a loon call from the end of the lake. You may not see it, but you hear it, and it's just something that calls out. When you watch the loons, there's a lot of very obvious behaviors. So courtship, 2 birds going around, checking out the territories in May, setting up nest sites, taking care of their chicks. But then a lot of times you get out there and you see some behaviors that are a little odd, like two birds swimming around with their bills down. That's not necessarily normal, or you don't see it very often. That could be a pair in courtship. It could also be an intruder loon. They have some overlap in their behavior. Or there's a lake that normally has a pair, and then you all of a sudden have 4 loons. Who are those other 2? What are they doing? Why are they there? Where are they spending their time? What are they doing with the pair? How are they interacting? Or this loon that's right next to the dock, right next to these people, sort of like, hey, what you doing up there? My guess is that bird has been involved in a territorial fight, or at least dispute, and it's trying to avoid dealing with another loon. It could care less about people in that situation. So we'll go over the sort of the summering, or the entire lifespan of the loon, some of the conservation stuff we're doing about them, or working around them, and then I'll get on to some of the future questions that we have and concerns, as well as some rescue stories at the very end. So we do partner with Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department. I think they're really supportive. We get a small amount of money from them every year, and they want to keep doing that because loons get a lot of phone calls and a lot of emails, and they can forward all those to me. So my kitchen table is where I do my work. And what I do is all that group on the right is just coordinating all of those things. So the big one is volunteers. We have over 350 volunteers, maybe 100 who are super active, another 250 that are just occasional. And that's a neat thing about this project. You can do as much or as little as you'd like. We work with hydroelectric companies to help try to prevent flooding of nests. We work with Tufts University, VINS, and LPC, and some others on mortality. University of New Hampshire now doing a lot of helping out with that. So lots and lots of different players. Most of our funding comes from individual donors, so we are always looking for support. It's hard to fund long-term monitoring projects. So if you have the means or know people who have an interest in loons and are looking to support something, we really could use the help. Almost all the photographs are from folks in the state who just send me photographs. This is just a partial list, and it's just really fun. So this is an Eleanor Osborne shot from a raft up on Forest Lake. She took this almost 20 years ago when she got an article in Vermont Life magazine. Eleanor lives down the road from me. So lots of things facing loons. Shoreline development, loss of habitat, loss of nesting sites, fishing gear, predation of nests, and flooding of nests, and then just people on our lakes. We don't have that many lakes compared to Maine and Minnesota and Canada, and we're out there using them, and that loons and people kind of our activities overlap in where they live. And back in 1983, loons were in trouble. There were a lot of empty lakes. Here's where there were 7 nesting pairs that year. So Thurman Dix Reservoir, trying to think what, Peachum Pond maybe, East Long Pond, Green River Reservoir. Those are some of the ones where they were nesting. Only 29 adults counted on the survey that year. Not all lakes were surveyed, so I'm sure there were slightly more than that, but there weren't a lot more. Our program, we're focused on the monitoring of all these pairs. We do an annual count in July, the 3rd Saturday of July, trying to get an estimate of the population. Management, so trying to prevent flooding with rafts, try to prevent conflict with shoreline use, rafts, signage, lots of education. The volunteers become educators, and I think that's one of my proudest moments is like getting people involved where they kind of like take the lead on their lakes and their lake associations. Well, rescue birds, we just had a one a few weeks ago in Berlin. I'll share some photos at the very end. And then we're getting back into research, trying to do a little bit more with toxicology and parasites and other things like that through banding and blood samples and all of our necropsies. And what's great is volunteers can participate in almost all of this. So in the spring, mid-April, ice opens up, they show up. They're coming back to set up their territories. They often show up within hours to a day or two of ice opening. So a lake like in the lower right, that's probably like a 400, 500, 600 acre lake. You could probably get a territory in the north. You could get one in the south here. And if there's more water off to the right, you could get a 3rd territory. They're very visually oriented. 100 acres plus or minus is pretty typical for a territory, maybe 150. and they'll defend that entire area as much as they can. So a lake under 200 acres tend to only see a single pair, but you get above that, you can start getting more. They spend a lot of time sort of just cruising the lake, getting to know each other. That's pretty much what courtship is spending time together. They'll look for nest sites. This is copulation on a raft. They'll get intruder loons coming in, third birds. On the picture on the right, you actually have what's called wing rowing. So they're dealing with a third bird and letting them know that that they occupy that. But most of the time, 70 to 83% of the time, both male and female return. But a substantial amount of time, 15 to 30%, there's a switch in one of the mates. What happened? One might have died over the winter. One may have moved to a different lake. We don't know why, essentially. We may not know why. Or this is kind of the exciting part, is the eviction, territory takeovers, where a third bird comes in and actually wins a spot in a territory and kicks another bird out. Males challenge males, females challenge females. So that picture on the left, you can see their chests are kind of reared up a little bit, especially that middle bird, and their bills are down. There's a very serious discussion going on in that photograph. Those birds are like telling a third bird to, like, this is serious. We're about ready to go after you. It may stop right there and you may not see nothing more, and they may swim together for a little bit and one swims off, and that's it. The birds on the right are in high alert mode. Their necks are extended. The one on the right is probably doing a tremolo call, which is the alert call. But then other times you get birds just swimming around together, doing a little circle dance. And it looks like they're just having a little tea party. But there's a lot being said between them, even if it doesn't escalate like these other two photographs. So the average marriage between a male and a female, this is based on Wisconsin data, is only 4 to 5 years. And then there's a switch in one of those birds. Sometimes it'll last just 1, 2, 3 years and you get a switch. And there's one pair in Michigan that was together for almost 20 years. And they are both around, and they're in their upper 30s and maybe even their 40s now. Absolutely incredible that they can live that long. We used to say up 20 to 30 years, but now we know they can live to upward of 30 to even into the 40s. They'll have multiple partners over a lifetime, but when they're together, they're monogamous. And the other neat thing about loons is they share pretty much in everything equally. That's sitting on the nest, taking care of the chick, feeding the chick, their own personal behavior, preening, floating around, doing nothing, all of that. It's pretty much equal. Nesting will start in mid-May up until late June, sometimes even early July. We have had early May nests, but that's pretty rare. I really tell volunteers to start doing their surveys May 20th or May plus or minus to get that first check on the old nest site, because they often return to the same nest site, but not always. Takes about a month for incubation. Mom and dad are switching spots every 4 to 8 hours. They'll sit there. It's a long time of sitting on an egg. They can nest at 3, but most of them will return to the region when they're 3 or 4, spending the first few years of their life on the ocean. And then they spend 3 or 4 years trying to figure out where they're going to find a spot in a territory. It takes a long time to find that spot, whether it's starting a new territory or whether it's winning a spot in an existing one. So there's a long sort of lag time before they actually start breeding. They love islands. If you have a lake with an island, that's the first place I look to see if we got birds looking for territories or starting a territory, and then where would they nest. So if they have an island, that's where I'm going to be searching first. Marsh habitat is the next spot, or little spits of land sticking out. They just want to try to get that nest away from the shoreline, even if it's just a little bit of water, to get away from shoreline predators. It's probably the biggest cause of nest failure is shoreline predators, especially raccoons and maybe fox. We will put rafts out. We used to put a lot more for just like enhancing all nesting. Now we're pretty selective and we're trying not to use them unless we really need to. And the main reason would be flooding. We know that the water's going to go up and down like a yo-yo. So Waterbury Reservoir, we put one out where they tried nesting 5 or 6 years ago. Put it right next to where they nested. Didn't use it. Didn't nest for 2 or 3 years. Tried again last year, I think, or the year before. And that one flooded out. Had the raft right there, but they still aren't using it. And so they don't always work. Whereas some other spots, man, they find that thing within weeks. So it's highly variable. Predation, we used to put them out, but not really anymore because loons are doing so well. We don't need to crank out chicks like maybe we did back in the 90s and early 2000s. The other one is lack of habitat. So if they're nesting right near people and it's causing interference with shoreline activity, or the people are going to cause interference with the loons and cause a failure, then we might consider putting a raft in a quieter cove on a lake. So here are two rafts. Actually, we saw this photograph on the left from Forest Lake, and then the one on the right, I think, is Norton Pond, but taking a guess on that one. But we'll load them up with shrubs, sort of like give them some protection, visual protection. So if a boater comes in or another loon comes in, they can kind of hunker down. And it also helps prevent eagles from maybe nabbing an egg if there's a bunch of shrubbery right there. They lay 1 or 2 eggs. Like a lot of long-lived species, they tend to only have 1 or 2 eggs, and then they take care of their young all summer long into the fall. Versus the duck style of producing 5 to 10 eggs and then hope that 1 or 2 survive into the fall. I throw in mercury, the word here right now, just because one of the things we've seen is mercury is a neurotoxin and it affects behavior. And one of the things is we'll see declines in how much time they spend on the nest. A normal pair is on the nest 95 to 99% of the time between the male and the female, but high mercury birds tend to only be on the nest 80 to 85% of the time. And because of that, you see a lot more nest failure. Other things we see with mercury are just they're with a chick, but they're not feeding the chick. So there's places and we see it more downwind from coal burning power plant emissions. So Eastern Maine, Nova Scotia has the highest mercury levels in North America, and productivity has definitely been seen to be reduced by upward of 40%. And it can be attributed to the mercury. One of the things we do is nest site management. So we're looking for the sites that are more prone to potential disturbance. So this bird on the left is in hiding position. So if you're this close, it's time to back off slowly and let that bird be. But there's just a lot of boat traffic out there these days. It can cause a bird to leave the nest, which makes it prone to predation. Or these guys will find the nest too. But if a loon is sitting there, they may be able to deter one of these predators from getting there. But if they're off the nest because of people, it leaves those eggs open. The other things that can happen is that they rush off the nest and knock an egg, or they're off too long and the eggs cool off. Or if they're disturbed too often on a Saturday, on Memorial Day weekend, they might just give up and abandon the nest. So we will put signs out. We probably overuse signs in Vermont, but they do work. They provide an educational tool. They provide people a reason to point out to people who are maybe getting a little too close to say, hey, can you respect those signs? But we don't put them everywhere. And we're trying not to use them where we don't really, maybe they can get by without them. They can handle an occasional disturbance. They'll get off the nest. Broder goes away. They go right back to the nest within 10, 15, 20 minutes. So it's not a big deal to have a few disturbances. It's when it happens potentially a lot. It's also a great way for volunteers to take charge and help out on their lakes. Dealing with birds that nest in new locations is a big part of my job for new pairs. So we have a bird behind that sign on the right sitting on shore. And if you look behind that 15 feet, there's a cabin. And so I work with those landowners when the birds do nest there to see if it's going to work out or not. It doesn't always, but sometimes we can just let the people know when they're going to be back, when they're going to be off that nest. So chick rearing, this is the early stages, the 1 and 2 week old chicks, definitely the cute and fluffy stage. Mom and dad are both attending to the chick, back riding like the one on the lower left. It's just definitely an amazing sight to see if you can get, you're 100, 200, 300 feet away from these with binoculars and watching this type of thing. Because you just can become so involved and so attached to these little guys because they are pretty amazing to watch. But it's also the most vulnerable time for those little guys, whether it's eagles, big fish, snapping turtles. Those are probably the main predators, and even bad weather. So a hailstorm, big high winds. The loons, the feathers on those chicks aren't super waterproof compared to the adults. And so if they get disturbed, it can kind of be the end of that bird. They'll grow up, they'll get into their more adolescent stage, which isn't quite so cute and fluffy, kind of the awkward stage. But look at the foot on the bird on the upper right. That's probably about a 4-week-old chick. We could actually put a band for an adult on that leg. The diameter, it's not actually a circle, it's more of an oblong shape from a physiology standpoint for paddling and pushing. All that growth is going into the leg. It's a little shorter than an adult leg, and the webbed foot is slightly smaller, but not a lot at that age. It's incredible to see. And they need to be able to start, cruising around, avoiding other loons, avoiding predators, and keeping up with mom and dad, and then start catching their own fish. But they're going to keep feeding all the way until they're older. And then they're going to start growing in their flight feathers when they get to about 6-7 weeks of age, which is the lower right. You see those little smooth feathers right behind the head? That's the beginning of the flight feathers, and the gray fluff is the molt before. Disturbance is always kind of a concern when people come in and usually it's people trying to get too close for a photograph, or they just want a really good look. We've never really documented mortality because of people doing that, but it definitely disturbs the family. You'll hear tremolo calls. They'll be swimming away from you all the time. It's just a sign that you're too close, and just let them come to you if you're lucky. Otherwise, use binoculars and watch from a distance. Loons are becoming very habituated, especially on some ponds where there's lots of boat traffic, and sometimes they'll come right up to you and they could care less. But it's a good sign to stay calm and just kind of paddle slowly or boat slowly. I don't think my audio is working for the calls. So the yodel call is the male call, and that's a picture of a male doing a yodel, and it's a territorial call telling mainly other loons to go away. But they'll do that to eagles, float planes, definitely when people come too close. But it's a high aggression call. And that's sort of big crescendo and repeat syllables. The whale call is often called the wolf call, sort of that's a sort of an identification call and what's up, but not a lot of aggression in that or concern. It's more of just sort of checking in with other birds in the area, especially the family. Tremolo is the alert call, sometimes an agitated call. The loon laugh, people call it.
Eric,
it's just an excitement.
sorry to interrupt you. I don't know if it's me, but I cannot hear the audio. I don't know if others can.
No, I don't. The audio is not working. I need to figure that out.
But
so I'm doing it just by myself.
Yeah, but I can't hear your call.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Anyway, the tremolo is the agitated call. It's sort of a loon laugh. And then the hoot is a close proximity call. When they're just sort of in a family group or a group of other loons, and there's a real quiet sort of a hoo hoo type thing. And I put these folks in the picture below because they've done a lot of the research on interpreting what these calls do and how loons use them. But the yodel is one of the more interesting ones with the male, because the bigger the male, the deeper the yodel, and birds know that. If it's a higher pitch yodel, it's a smaller bird, and the bigger the bird, the more likely they're able to hold the territory. A smaller bird is going to be more prone to a takeover. But smaller birds can make up for that with repeat syllables at the end. So if you look up the yodel and listen to it, and it sort of relates to motivation. But essentially they're using yodel, a communications tool, to avoid fighting and to announce their territory, to tell other birds that this is occupied, to tell them to go away. And move off. So it's a very important way for a pair to hold and establish or to establish and hold a territory. When you do get third birds coming in, they'll just swim in a circle. They're getting to greet each other. They'll get to know each other. Oftentimes that's it, and the third bird swims away, and that's it. In the midsummer, late summer, you see more of the groups like below in the bottom shot. We call them social gatherings. They're still gathering information about the pair in the area, but they're also just gathering information about all the loons in the region. Who's strongest, who's weakest, who's who are the pair, where are they, where are they hanging out. If there's a chick present, they often disappear, and we call that stashing the chick. And so there's a chick in that upper right photograph. They'll go hang out near shore until that third bird leaves or the group disperses or moves to another part of the lake. And then the adults will go find the chick and take care of it again. So visual communication, just like audio communication, is really important in holding a territory and letting other birds know what's going on. So less aggression, you'll see these little what we call short dives or join dives, where they're just kind of like hanging out, but there's really not a lot of splashing going on. There's not a lot of big movements. It's more subtle, but it can start escalating when they do bigger splash dives or chest rising, head rising, or it gets really escalated like the lower photograph. That's actually a bird in what we call the penguin dance, and it's churning the water, and that's a really angry bird, letting another bird. So there's probably a male and female territory holders plus a third bird in that territory, and the male's really getting upset and telling that bird to go away. But again, if they can avoid a fight, they might avoid even death, because male loons, especially when it does escalate to a fight, do occasionally kill each other to get that spot in the territory. So here's a shot. We got all sorts of things. We got a male doing yodel in the middle. We have probably maybe the female in the background kind of hanging out. And then we have wing rowing. Maybe that's the intruder. All going on in the same photograph. This is from Lorna Kane Roloff, who unfortunately passed away this summer, up on Long Pond in Westmore. She was an amazing photographer. We just watch these birds forever and just catch these moments. I just love that photograph. Some other things that loons are doing all the time is maintenance behavior, preening. So they're having to zip up those feathers and maintain that waterproofness. So wing flaps are part of that. Putting their bill through their feathers. There's an oil gland in the back. They'll spread some of that oil, powdery substance to help maintain the waterproofness. And then the bird on the upper right actually has a band combination on it, blue over a silver. More or less common is this thing we call bathing, or I've labeled it extreme preening, because birds go ballistic in the water. They're thrashing the water. It's my most common phone call. People are sure that the bird is caught up in fishing line and they're trying to get it off, because they're just like, they might work one wing, flapping it over and over again. They're dunking themselves. They might work one side of their body with their bill over and over again. And the bird on that upper left actually is doing a rollover upside down in the water. It's really cool to watch, as long as you know that it's not a threat or not, something's not wrong with the bird. It's just flushing their feathers of mites and dirt. All water birds kind of do this. I've seen a full flock of geese churn up the water all at one time as they all kind of caught on and say, hey, okay, it's time to do our bathing exercises here. So it's kind of neat. It's like relieving an itch. It feels really, really good, I bet. All right, late season. So this would be more August into September. The chicks are getting up to 8-9 weeks of age. Not quite ready to fly, the ones on the upper left. But then when they become really smooth and those feathers are ready to go, they're going to start practicing anywhere between 10 and 14 weeks of age. They're going to start feeding a lot more themselves. And then the parents might actually take off before the chicks do in September or October. And the chicks are kind of hanging out. The parents are going to be heading to the ocean usually in October. Chicks, it's more late October, November on average. But this year we actually documented a chick leave its natal lake the last week of August. So that was really unusual. Usually sometimes small lakes, you'll see them leave in September. But to see them leave that early was definitely a record. Whereas we got other birds that stick around all the way into December, into even January if the water's open. So this is a chick on the lower right. And I should point out, I call it a scalloped pattern. There's a little white along the fringe of each feather. And you can tell that from a 1- and 2-year-old subadult. Those guys are going to be more uniform gray. They're not going to have that little whitish edge to them. So if a subadult does come back early, they usually, they're usually on the ocean at that time, but occasionally we do see them show up here. That's one of the differences you can tell. Otherwise, the 1-, 2-, and 3-year-olds do not have adult plumage yet. It's not until they get to 1- and 2-year-olds don't. The 3-year-olds start getting the breeding plumage. Some of those chicks don't make it off. So we have a bird that was stuck in a hole up here on Lake Elligo. We got the fire department involved. They practiced using their airboat, which was mainly for ice fishermen and snowmobilers. But they were able to nab that bird, and that bird got a trip to the ocean. And here's where our birds in New England go. So the circles represent banded birds, and then the squares represent where they were observed again. Some of that is they were observed live, but sometimes it's a mortality event, and that's they were recovered. So that's where the white circles up in Maine. There's the blue ones for Vermont. There's the green ones. Is that green? I'm colorblind with reds and greens. Or is that gray? We're in New York, making their way down. And the black is New Hampshire. The arrows, however, represent a small study that was done of not many birds, like 10 or 11 telemetry birds, where they actually did implants. And the black arrows are, not the orange arrows. The black arrows are the telemetry birds. And most of those arrows are single arrow right to the coast. That's a 2-day window that the telemetry unit was reading. So most of those birds are flying from their natal lake to the ocean in one single flight. So making their way from New York down to Long Island Sound, and they're doing it without stopping. So it's pretty incredible. And they probably get there faster than we could drive, because they're probably cruising with a tailwind at 60 or 70 miles an hour. The dotted line way over in the left in New York was a chick. It was the only chick that had a telemetry unit implanted in it. And that bird took almost 2 months to reach Long Island Sound in January, leaving in late November. The orange ones are Vermont birds. Those were banded birds that were then, unfortunately, all recoveries of mortalities down at the Cape, Martha's Vineyard, and Long Island Sound. So you can see where our New England birds go. New England coast is probably not my first choice of where I'd want to spend the winter. You think of nor'easters coming through and just cold, harsh weather. Whereas a lot of other birds go all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, Florida, the Gulf of California, the Southern California coast. Those are more interior North America birds. So where I did my early work in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, those birds are headed way south and having to migrate a lot further. What's interesting is those birds that have to fly 500,000, 2,500 miles from Saskatchewan, they're a lot smaller. So a Saskatchewan male, the average weight is 9.6 pounds. The females are 7.3. Compare that to a Maine bird's average weight, 13.2 for males, 10.3 for a female. 30% bigger from mid North America to the coastal areas. So pretty cool. It pays to be big to hold a territory, but you need to be small to be able to migrate that far. There's been a 16-pound male, I think, from Nova Scotia, caught and banded. And the Saskatchewan birds are the smallest. In the winter, they actually go through a full molt, and they become flightless for a few weeks to a month, February, March. And this is an adult in the lower picture on the ocean. All right, so that kind of closes the loop for and they'll come back in April up this way. So future issues, mortality, we're still seeing lead cases. Again, I'm working with VINs and doing our necropsies and local vets to get x-rays. We're seeing a slight increase in aspergillosis, which is a fungal disease. We're actually having some cases of malaria show up in the last decade. Is it going to be large scale, small scale? We're not sure yet. Luckily, it hasn't taken off since the first case back in about a decade ago. But it's a southern disease that we're seeing now in northern climates. Climate change is a big one. Lake ecosystem changes is one of our big concerns. How is it going to affect the food availability? Are we seeing more? Is it this warming of the environment? We're seeing more aspergillosis and malaria. There's other parasites and diseases that we're trying to track. A big one is nest flooding with these big, huge rain events. I'm going to talk about that more in just a minute. Reduced water clarity because of these flood events. Heat stress, as well as late ice formation and birds sticking around too long, all the way to the point where they're molting and they can't fly if they wanted to. So to help with some of this work, we're actually intentionally catching and banding loons in the summer, taking blood and feather samples, putting bands on them. We'd use a big salmon dip net, big spotlight, and it takes a lot of people to help out. Always fun to kind of hang on to those little chicks. Quite a bigger challenge to hang on to an adult and get a blood sample out of the leg at a vein there. But we'll be testing for mercury, malaria, aspergillosis, and we've started to test for PFAS and some of the other chemicals that are out there. Mercury is just, loons are a great sort of bird to follow. And if you go from Alaska to New England, you can see how much mercury increases as you get to the East Coast. Quite a bit, 2 parts per million. And you're starting to get to a range where you get over 2 to 3, you're going to start seeing behavioral effects. In New England itself, Vermont is on the low end, and that has a lot to do with our soil types and the pH and the type of bacteria that allows for mercury to become available in the biosystem or bioavailable. Whereas more acidic environments in Maine and Massachusetts, you see higher mercury. In lower acid or low acid, higher, more neutral, you see less mercury being available in the system. It might still be in the lake, but it's just not getting into the food web. Climate change. So here we already went through a few of these. I think I'll skip this and move on to the rain part. You know, for loons, rain's not a big deal for the individual bird. I mean, they're in the water all the time. They could be in downpour rain and it doesn't matter at all. But for a nest, it does matter. So here's 2 nests that are actually 3 nests that are all very vulnerable. They're on sort of sandbar, shallow climb, 2 to 3, 4 inches off the water line. Doesn't take much to cause a flooding of a nest in this situation. And you can see those eggs pretty much in the water in that lower right shot. 2019, we had a record 13 flooded nests in Vermont, but then we had 3 years of drought, and we only had 1 flooded nest in all 3 years. It was the lowest I've ever seen. But then remember 2023, the first big flood event that we had. It happened July 10th and 11th. We lost 6 of the 8 natural nests that were out there. If that had happened in late June, mid-June, we probably would have lost 40 or more nests because of that flood event. Last year, 2024, we had 2 big rains, one in June, one in July 10 again, and we had more flooded nests, 12. Occasionally, you get a bird that's way up out of the water. This is the most unusual nest site in Vermont as far as elevation. I mean, this is a 10-foot climb from the water horizontally to get up to this nest site above this cedar tree. Absolutely incredible site. And I can't believe the birds keep going back to it. But they'll make that trek right up there. It's on an island, so they're probably less worried about predators. You know, they have moderate success at this site, but it's definitely hard to get to because loons can't walk. They have to kind of shuffle on their bellies. But this guy could handle any flooding event, most likely. The other part is rafts. You know, they actually do play a role in these flooding events. Almost all of them are not affected at all by a flooding event. So here's some raft sites. Heat stress. When water gets, when we get those big 90-degree, 85-degree days, loons are getting in the water a lot more off the nest to cool off. They have to pant like a dog to stay cool, and they start leaving the nest a lot more above 75 degrees. So is that going to cause problems with the egg? In some cases, yes. In other cases, no. It's a really hard thing to document, but we're trying to work with all the New England groups to see if it's becoming an issue or not. We're possibly seeing more parasites and insects that are affecting loons. Some are going to be detrimental. Others are just seeing an increase, but not really detrimental. So again, we're monitoring this through mortality events and also through our blood and feather samples. This late ice formation. So the ice forming later, they get stuck on a lake. This just got written up in Northern Woodlands magazine in the winter edition. This rescue attempt on Lake Champlain back in 2016, where we had 9 loons in this hole that was in February, late February. Some of these birds could fly, some of them couldn't. But we were able to rescue most of them. The other thing is with rainfall events is turbidity. And this is, to me, one of the most concerning ones. In Wisconsin, they've had a 20-year decline in productivity. And this is just based on very detailed studies by a guy named Walter Piper and the Wisconsin DNR. And the chicks that are actually reaching 5 weeks of age has fallen quite a bit. They're not seeing a change in the nesting attempts or the hatch rate. It's the chick mortality midsummer, late summer. And what's highly correlated with water turbidity. And that turbidity is highly increased, related to increased rainfall events. And the males are losing weight, the chicks are losing weight, less so with the female, but the end result is lower chick survivorship, few young adults returning into that adult breeding cohort. So we might be losing, the number of adults that are going to be able to breed in the future. It's a long-term process. We'll see what happens. We haven't actually documented any decreases in New England, but we are seeing some of the immediate effects just from watching it, where we're seeing decreases in that being able to see clearly through the water. But it just makes more things going on in our lakes and makes our lakes less healthy for everything, not just loons, but loons are one of the things we can watch very closely. But more algae, more phytoplankton, more suspended matter, more phosphorus and nitrogen, all of those things because of these rainfall events. And here's an example of Lake Rescue. They had their first and only chick back in 2023. That flood hit. The water, you couldn't even put, you couldn't see your paddle, you couldn't see your hand. It was absolutely looked like pea soup. The adults left right away. They could not feed, and the chick died 5 days later. It was a combination of an infection and starvation. And so is that happening more often? We're getting a few cases of malnourished chicks showing up, and one of the concerns is that water clarity is the issue. So what do you do about that? Well, homeowners can just help by making their shorelines, a little more resilient, and make it so erosion is not going to be as big an issue, letting it grow wild, having buffer areas, things like that. Working with your towns and dealing with ditches and roads coming, or streams coming in, and what's being carried in those streams. So there's lots of things we can do on a scale on that level. But obviously the big, huge events are going to have, catastrophic events, results. And there's not a whole lot we can do except start dealing with the climate change issue as best we can. Fishing gear, unfortunately, is still an issue. It's always going to be. Loons, they'll take live bait, they'll take lures, and there's more loons out there, so there's more of them taking that. So we're always seeing some issues where we can help them, other ones we cannot. Lead is still out there, and the reason we know that is through necropsies, where we actually analyze what's going on. We take an x-ray of what's going on. This bird on the lower right actually has fishing line right around it. So that was an obvious case, but was it lead or was it just the fishing line or both? But here's an example, a bird that was lethargic, beaching itself, just looking, not healthy in that upper right, found dead, ended up being lead. Lead just causes this sort of, state of torpor where they're just not doing much. And then eventually they'll die from that. And we'll get an x-ray, we can see it in there, but then we open it up, we can test for it. One of the things we're doing is we have over 30 stations around the state now for people to deposit their lead. Obviously half ounce or less is what's illegal in Vermont. Half ounce and bigger is still legal, but we're just trying to provide an easy place for people to put their lead. So these are, I think Lake Iroquois has one of these tubes where you could deposit your lead. And I'm sure it's a lot of people just haven't gotten it out of their fishing tackle boxes. So we're just trying to make it as easy as possible. This is my coworker, Eloise Gerard on the right, and a high school student, Ava Purdy, who is now a first year at Middlebury, who's interned with us the last 2 years. Here was an interesting case that some of you may have read about in Vermont Digger last summer, a year and a half ago. It was a bird I banded my first year on the job in 1998. You can see it coming off the nest with 2 eggs behind it and its mate. That was, again, 1998. So 2023, it was found dead. We took an x-ray. We could see a white object in the x-ray, which made me think that it could have been lead. It ends up, that was a non-lead material in there. It was not lead that killed this bird. It was a boat hit. And we could tell by the contusions on the body, unfortunately. And I let the lead veterinarian, Mark Pokris, do this one because he's so good. He's seen over 2,000 dead birds in his life, and just knows what kills loons. He's the expert. And it was really sad. And you can see how big this guy was. He's held this territory since 1998. May have disappeared for years and then got his territory back. But this was a big, big male. But sometimes we are successful in helping birds. So here's a bird caught in fishing line. It actually was raising its chick. It nested. we were able to go in and capture it, release, cut that all off. Here, the three of us to remove that fishing gear off the bill. And then we were able to let them all go, and they were okay. And we put bands on that it was a female that was all caught up in the fishing line. So occasionally we do have some happy ends from these situations. Here was a bird that got caught up in a treble hook, fishing gear on its webbed feet. You can see the lower on the left side. You can see the hook toward its rear end. Both feet were caught up in that hook. There was a vet in Maine who had done surgery and worked with webbed feet and cauterized it, and there was a lot of sort of decay material in the webbed feet, so they had to remove all that. But the bird behaved almost 100% in the ponds, and they were able to release that bird on the ocean, and hopefully it's just living its life on the ocean. Even if it can't maybe swim 100%, maybe it's 80% or 90%. Maybe that's enough. We're hopeful. We worked with a group called Avian Haven on this rescue. And then just December 26th this year, or well, last year, my first rescue with a gill net. And you can, if in this picture on the left, you can see the birds on the left poking up in that hole. We have the gill net over the water, and we eventually got that net so it was dipping down into the water, and that bird just kind of kept popping up and down. We weren't sure if it was going to work or not, because it just kept avoiding the net. I could see the net, so that means the bird could see the net. But eventually, it caught the net, and I was able to pull it out, upper left picture, bring it to me to safe ice. And then Eloise was able to handle the bird and get it into the container. And we were able to bring that to Lake Champlain and release it. So this was a chick of the year from Berlin Pond. They hadn't had a chick for several years, so it was pretty exciting that we were able to get this bird off successfully. Unfortunately, it's like, why didn't it leave? It was just, it had plenty of food, and they don't know it. They got to learn on their own. Parents don't leave them a detailed map or tell them when to go. It's all genetic and trying to figure that out. Once they do figure it out, it's good, but it can take a while for some of the chicks. They don't get it right away. So always fun to have a success. Not all of them are successful, these rescues, but in this case, it worked. We learned a lot. So in wrapping up, loon habitat and human recreational habitat almost entirely overlap. And that's why we're always going to hopefully have a project that can deal with that, work with landowners, work with boaters, educate, and just figure out how to have loons and people coexist. And we can do it. We've shown it works. And this graph shows it extremely well. 83, 7 nests, 2005, 52 nests, last year, 123 nests. I'm actually hoping that number starts to plateau. We're reaching, I wouldn't say what's called saturation, but most of our ponds, 100 acres and above, even 50 acres and above, now have loon activity or even pairs on them. So we're starting to see the chick numbers level out, that yellow line, but we're still seeing a growth in the number of nest attempts. So for Vermont and actually all of New England, we're seeing a great recovery and growth throughout the last 20 years. Unlike Wisconsin, where we have some big concerns. So we're going to be watching for that here in New England. And to me, one of the biggest neat things is seeing loons nesting outside the north central, northeastern parts. So we now have them on all the lakes in central Vermont, southern Vermont, and even in western Vermont, we're starting to see more. So Lake Iroquois is the closest. We got some up on Fairfield Pond and Metcalf Pond. Still have yet to document any nesting on Lake Champlain. We don't spend a lot of time out there, so it would be kind of a random shot that we'd catch that. I did spend 3 weeks out there in 2002 trying to figure out what was going on loon-wise. But it's a great spot for young adults and sub-adults, the 1 and 2 year olds, hanging out over the entire summer. So you'll still see lots of loons out there, especially in migration as well. And last year we counted, actually, I don't think this is quite right. I need to update that number. I think it's more like 374 loons. I think I did a misprint here. For our annual count. So we're approaching 400 adult loons in Vermont compared to 40 or 30 to 40 back 40 years ago. All right. So we're doing great right now in Vermont. We need to keep our lakes healthy. And those are the kind of things that working with Vermont DEC on lakes, their Lakes and Ponds division, working with lake associations, and just getting people to be really aware of what they can do to help their lakes and advocate for that. I've just been given a lot of testimony on wake sports. It's just another stressor that our lakes do not need, and we're hoping that it'll get even limited more on a bunch of lakes. It's a sport that is meant for oceans and Lake Champlain maybe, but not our small lakes. And loons are just one little part of that. And, loons are just one of these species that touch so many people. This is a local resident. We asked her, she was really interested. She came along on a rescue of a chick from Ricker Pond. The bird was a little bit weak, so we were actually let her handle the bird. And, that moment has probably, changed her life in a lot of ways. Just being able to handle that bird and what's that going to do to her future. So, and let alone the loon's future. So we are, again, looking for support. Go to the vtecostudies.org. If you want to volunteer, have a list of lakes to go to paddle and explore or boat, email Eloise or I at loon@vtecostudies.org. And love to have people involved. Even if we have a lot of people involved on one lake, it doesn't matter. The more the merrier as far as I'm concerned. Interesting shot, but it's just like loons adopted a duck. They lost their chicks within a few days. They came across a mallard, a wayward mallard, and they raised this mallard for 6 weeks until they separated ways. No one knows the true outcome, but that mallard was almost adult size back riding at one point in late July before it disappeared. But really amazing what can happen in the animal world. So that's just kind of a fun, interesting shot. This is from about 4, 5, 6 years ago in Wisconsin. All right, I'm gonna stop there, and we'll do some questions that Ingrid has composed.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks. That was really good. Very, very, very interesting. What a success story, and what a network you have of volunteers all across the state. So yes, everybody feel free to put your questions on the chat. We have one question so far. Are other northeastern states seeing similar increases in loon populations as you're seeing here in Vermont?
Yep. New York and New Hampshire have the most sort of detailed studies like ours, and following pairs, and looking at where they're nesting and all of that. Ours is the most dramatic, but we also have the smallest number of lakes. So even though we're up at close to 400 lakes, 400 loons, there's 800 or 900 probably in New Hampshire. There's 1,500 plus in New York, and then there's 3,000 or 4,000 in Maine. Maine doesn't follow, except for a few subsets. Aren't follow. They have a few subsets where they're doing productivity studies like we do, where we follow nest sites, but otherwise they do an annual count.
Oh yes. So do you mind putting the screenshot of the contacts again for people to see that while we ask the questions?
Let's see. How do I do that?
So I think
I'm gonna go into the chat and just put Loonette.
Or if you want to share again, and it was your
just
slide or the one before.
I'd have to share the screen again, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna put it in the chat too.
Okay.
Here's the email to send me direct. Is
Okay.
loon@vtecostudies.org. And then I can put share. Let's see, let's scroll down. We'll get there. Okay, can you see that?
Yes. Excellent. Another question there for you, Eric. What is the difference between a nesting pair and a territorial pair?
So about 80% of the time, a territorial pair is where you have a twosome together, they're defending the lake or it's part of a lake. And in a given year, about 80% of all territorial pairs actually nest. About 20% of the time, the pair takes the year off. Why do they take a year off? Sometimes it's because there's been a switch in the mates. It takes longer for a new pair, or even an existing bird plus a new one to kind of establish their hierarchy amongst the local loons and figure out each other. It's that whole courtship period. It's a territorial establishment. So there can be, even though there's still a pair on that lake, they may not nest. They may not nest because of high water or low water, and their nest site that they've used for 5 years just isn't accessible or that good of a site anymore. And so they've lost their nest site, and so they just don't figure out where to go. So there's always a bunch of pairs that do not nest, and so they would still count as territorial pairs, but they're not nesting pairs.
Excellent. Once the chicks are grown, do families still recognize each other, or do they become future territory threats?
Likely the latter. They're again. I'm going to give a little detail. Wisconsin, there's a guy named Walter Piper who's banded over 2,000 loons, and he has a staff of 3 or 4 people, and he's actually expanded now into Minnesota, and they'll spend 2 to 4 hours on a lake following a pair plus any other bird they find. And because so many are banded, they kind of know who the intruders are, who the pair is, and they can figure out all of these sort of interactions that way. It's just amazing what they've learned to figure out. What was the actual question again?
If they can recognize one.
Okay.
Growing.
Yeah. So he's rarely ever documented a chick actually interacting with their parents. But they do tend to return within 20 to 40 miles of their natal lake, but they always tend to go sort of nearby. I think there's been 1 or 2, maybe 3 cases of inbreeding where a chick is actually mated with one of the adult, but it's really, really rare. And it's doubtful that they recognize each other.
Very interesting. Another question there. Your thoughts on the possible herbicide application in Lake Bomosena, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah.
Or other lakes for treatment of milfoil, any loon effects?
I mean, it's one of those things. It's like the forever chemicals or other, some of them are going to have an effect, others are not. And it's one of those things that the laboratory tests have not shown, at least as far as I've read, major concerns with animals of this size. But what is it? I mean, I don't know what it does to insects. I haven't read the details on that. It also, some of these effects are going to would take 50, 60 years of chronic exposure, or maybe 10 or 15 years of chronic exposure, like every year, all summer long, to have a negative effect. Whereas a one-time exposure for a few months and then it dissipates, might not have an effect on their life. But again, is that something that then happens? Something happens 5, 10 years ago that is undetectable. I mean, we would never know the cause-effect relationship. So it's a tough one because, milfoil is, can change the lake's ecology pretty drastically. And so is it worth the short-term gains when we have some unknowns in the future, or is it not? And so far, a lot of those unknowns in the future haven't shown themselves to be major issues. But again, I'm speaking a little, I don't know for sure. It'd be, I'm hoping that the biologists who are working on that are really kind of like looking ahead at some of that. But, humans aren't so smart sometimes. So.
Yeah. There was one picture of a loon rescue that was at night. Was there a specific reason for this versus during the daytime?
Yeah. So to try to chase a loon down in the daytime, I mean, they see you coming, they dive, they show up 30 feet away, 100 feet away. You're never going to get close. If you come in with a spotlight and you blind them, like looking into the headlight of a car, you can't see the car. They can't see us in the boat. And if we're lucky, we can get within 10 feet of them, put our net in the water and be able to grab them. It doesn't always work that way for a rescue. But when we intentionally go out with a 4-week chick and their parents, we'll actually imitate an adult loon with a little hoots or a little calls. And they think we're a third loon behind that light. And they want to stay with their chick and defend it. And so we're able to sneak up to them, get the net in and grab them, handle them, get the bands, take blood and feather samples, and then release them all together 20, 30 minutes later. And so that's the spotlighting has been key to allow us to get close enough.
Mhm. Great. The patterns on the loon's feathers are so beautiful and unique. What purpose or advantage do they provide the loon?
So the best example I have of this is I forgot my binoculars at home, and I was looking for a loon pair. I knew the pair was there. I was seeing one loon on the water, and I'm like, "Where's the other loon? It's got to be on a nest somewhere." And that's one of the keys of if you see two birds all of May and into June, and then all of a sudden you see one for 10 days. Again, it might just be based on two or three surveys, but like, where's that other loon? You know, the pairs should be there if they're there. And so I'm just scanning the shoreline, and as I head out, this is on Wolcott Pond, where they move nest sites a lot. And I thought, was that a little boulder? No, it wasn't anything. And I go out, and there's only one loon on the water, and I search all the existing or previous nest sites from the past 5 years. No one's there. I come back to the boat access. The spot where I thought I saw a little boulder was actually the back of the loon, head down in hiding position. But it's like a zebra. Those feathers broke up the pattern enough with the little grasses, and I couldn't see. I mean, I could not see that bird with the grasses. If it had just been out on a point, it would have been easy, plain as day to see. But you mix it in with some grasses, and yeah, it can be hard to see. One of the things, this might be a useful tool for AI, is actually looking at the neck pattern. Can loons actually help identify each other through the neck pattern? Neck patterns are unique. We can't tell who's who and what's what with that yet, but there's a chance that loons can. They don't have to call to each other. They don't have to you have their voice and their frequencies and their high, low, longer, shorter. They might be able to just look at that neck pattern or something else on the bird and be able to tell who's who.
Mm-hmm. All right. I swim in open water on a lake near the Maine, New Hampshire border. Are there times loons join me? There are times loons join me for a half a mile or more. Once a raft of 13 swam with me. Can you comment on this? What were they thinking?
Yeah, so they are, they're aware of everything going on in the water. Think about being in a car and you see like a fox on the side of the road. You can actually watch it because they don't recognize that car necessarily as a threat if it's not moving. And the same thing with a boat or a kayak. That's not like a instinctual predator, but a person swimming with arms and legs and feet, and yours now something that they're concerned about, or at least they're going to check you out to see, are you a threat or are you not a threat? So I wouldn't start splashing the water too vigorously when you're near a bird while you're swimming, because they will get agitated from that. Whereas they're mainly just checking you out, and most times, I would say 99.9% of the time, they're going to just sort of like check you out and leave you alone. I know of 3 cases now where loons have poked somebody swimming. One is where they jumped in the water right next to a loon family, not realizing the loon family was there. The other was just the really kind of aggressive bird, who was known to like confront things. Even a quarter mile away, he would like swim to a boat, swim to a swimmer, and check you out. He was just super aggressive. And this was a volunteer up on Curtis Pond who got poked. But it wasn't bad. It wasn't bad. It was just like a little, she brags about it now.
What is causing the decline in loon numbers in Wisconsin? Do you know?
Yeah, so the actual numbers have not declined yet, but they're concerned about it. It's chick numbers, the ones surviving who have not, and now the future 4, 5, 6-year-olds coming back is the concern. Are there going to be fewer of the young adults returning? And it has to do with that water clarity, and they're not feeding enough themselves and not feeding the chicks enough because they can't see to catch fish. They need clear water to catch fish. And insects. And so with increased turbidity, they're just not being as efficient. And so the chicks are getting fed less, and that's leading to lower survivorship.
Okay, there's a funny question there. On a spectacle pond, I saw a chick go up on the beach, turn around, defecate, then went back in the water. What was this all about?
It's the $1 million question, $6 million question. Every year, or not every year, but there's a few birds that have been documented in Maine, New Hampshire, where people witness this, and it's the same bird doing it over and over, like the same lake, the same bird, probably. And so why are they doing it? It does definitely has nothing to, I mean, it can't be water quality. They don't know about that. And we don't know what it is, why they would do that. Oftentimes it's an adult does it and the chick follows, but not necessarily. So yeah, go figure. They're just like, they want to keep their feces out of the water. That's good for them.
Have you made recommendations to the DEC on their position on wakeboarding?
Oh yeah. VCE as an organization, we try to be very science-based and use that science to guide questions. And we've kind of avoided a lot of the political debate as far as like coming out with an opinion. We'll provide the data and let you figure it out. But there are now cases enough that we actually have a staff person who's working with legislators to get our data into legislators' hands and policymakers. And in this case, we're actually showing, there's going to be some negative effects because loons are nesting 2 to 8 inches off the water, and sites that are directly exposed to where those wake sports could go could easily be inundated with a 6 to 10 inch wave. And maybe the 500-foot rule would be adequate to dissipate before it hits a nest in most cases. But it's, to me, how do you know you're 500 feet and not 300 feet? A 300 foot, you're going to put a 10-inch wave on that nest site. And that definitely would have an effect, whether it's a raft or a shoreline. And so how do you enforce that? How do you keep people, so 1,000 feet would have been a whole lot better, because then, if you're 500 feet, you're too close. Whereas 750 feet, yeah, maybe that's the sort of the middle zone. But they went with a 500-foot rule, which is actually the most progressive, or most, I don't know, I would say progressive, but it's the most strict rule in North America. Other states are still 200 feet for these boats, which is absolutely ridiculous. And I have a personal friend, really good canoeists. They were out on Squam Lake last summer and they got swamped. And it's like, whoa, these guys know how to paddle whitewater. They know how to deal with waves. And there was nothing they could do. They went right. They were done. They were over. And luckily they don't panic. But, if you're Lake Fairleigh with 4 kids camps on it, damn, that's going to, it's scary what some of the effects on people could be, let alone wildlife. What's it going to be on social gatherings? These big groups of loons, and all of a sudden they're in like 4-foot wide waves. I'm not sure. It hasn't been studied enough. Wake sports are still pretty new. Yeah, not, it's at least our policymakers have taken a lead, at least being the most strict, but it's like, it's not a compromise. And in this type of situation, it's like you're dealing with just a few really extreme cases of water that are just not normal for a lake.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think that we're out of time. We actually went over time.
Thank you for allowing that.
It was so interesting that I didn't want to cut it too short. So Pat, do you want to come back and join us one more time?
Yes, Eric, I want to say really thank you for a wonderful presentation. And, there were a couple of questions folks didn't get an opportunity to share, but is there a way in which folks could contact you if they have further inquiries about loons? Yeah,
so if you go to that email, loon@vtecostudies.org, shoot me a note. I don't check it as much in the winter months because I'm working a ski job up at Craftsbury, but I do check it probably weekly. I'll eventually get to you. So
I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation, and more than that, I really want to thank you for this really important work. And clearly, it's having a very positive impact on loon populations, and I'm sure everybody here greatly appreciates it. And
I think, for me, it's like, it's the people change. It's like people participating, people being part of it. And it's not just the loons that are benefiting from this. I mean, all these little stories that people hear about success, it's like gives us hope for other species and other projects, even if it takes longer. I mean, this one has been amazing to what's happened in 30 years. So it's just, it shows that with an effort, we can change lots of things and make things positive.
Great. Well, again, thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us. I do want to remind folks that we do have another program coming up next month on managing grassland habitats for grassland birds that are really struggling. And then for those of you who are in the area of Green Mountain Audubon, we do have an outing planned on the 15th. So just have to go to greenmountainaudubon.org, and we have plenty of other opportunities and programs in the future. So again, thank you very much, Eric. Thank you very much, Ingrid. I hope you all have a great evening, and hope to see you again.